Oh, hi. Welcome back. We're here in my studio where I do some of my painting, and we're going to be talking about the Quiet Revolution in Quebec and its relationship to art, particularly abstract art and experimental work post 1945. We'll be talking about Refus Global, a very important document in Canadian art. We'll be doing a lot of that in classroom, and let's get started. Well, let's look more closely into abstraction and non-objective painting. So we've seen that with abstraction, artists purposely distorted and manipulated imagery related to the visible world, what they saw. Maybe they were reducing an object to a more basic, pure geometric form. Maybe they took on biomorphic and nebulous kind of shapes. And this was all related to a process in art early in the 20th century in Europe, headed by the artist and writer André Breton of the Surrealist movement. They'd achieved something very new in art. Breton and others were very interested in the subconscious and experimenting with ways of making art while trying to remove the conscious thought of the artist from the process. And the result was something very interesting called automatism. In Canada, there were a group of artists who were deeply influenced by Breton and the Surrealists, notably in Quebec. So chief among them was Paul-Émile Bordua. Bordua was an artist and a teacher in Montreal, and he'd had very traditional artistic training under the famous Ausias Leduc, intending to follow in his master's footsteps and become a muralist devoted to decorating church interiors. But, as fate would have it, he found jobs difficult to find, in fact, no job at all, in the field, and instead he pursued a career in teaching and experimented with abstract and modern painting. He was instrumental in writing the manifesto of Les Automatistes called Refus Global, which translates roughly into reject everything. This is a very important document. It was highly inflammatory and it called for the abolition of the Catholic Church in Quebec, among other radical activities like tearing down the major cultural and social institutions. So, pretty serious stuff. The document itself only had 300 copies published, and they sold for $1 each. What happened to them all is really unknown. Still, the publication was so defamatory against the church, which still had a very strong hold on the daily lives of Quebecers, that Bourdieu was dismissed from his teaching job. He was fired. This devastated him. It caused family problems, he got divorced, he couldn't find another decent teaching position afterwards, and he died quite young at the age of 55 in 1960, but not before creating a series of very strong paintings that tell the story of how an abstract artist rejected recognizable objects and pursued art that did not depict any kind of object at all, non-objective painting. Experimenting with tools such as a palette knife, Bourdieu was able, in oil painting, to achieve fluid effects of color straight from the tube, and he blended right on the canvas. Like the previous painting that we were just looking at, the positive and negative space of figure and ground switch back and forth. Is that lime green field in the middle of the canvas fading into the distance, or is it in front of the other elements? Bourdieu also experimented with different media, such as gouache, which is a water-soluble and fast-drying medium. I'd like you to think about how the painterly quality of this image contrasts with the previous one. We can talk about this in class. Bourdieu had a dedicated group of young followers, many that were his students when he was teaching. Even more than he did, they experimented with art production. The only female in the group, Francoise Sullivan, was a multimedia artist involved in dance, painting, sculpture, conceptual art, even poetry. She was quite diverse. And her performance art was a precursor, in fact, to postmodern dance. Riopelle studied under Bourdieu, where the younger artist made his first abstract painting. He lived in Europe for many years before returning to Canada in 1960, then exhibiting at the National Gallery of Canada. It's worth noting about the narrative of modernism that the National Gallery creates with the exhibition an analysis of the paintings they own. Many of those we have been looking at are from the National Gallery of Canada. So what is the origin story of abstract and non-objective painting that the National Gallery tells? It's really important for us to think about. Riopelle uses a trowel and a thick paint splattered across the canvas, as everyone is quite aware of. But how does this get involved with the telling of that national story of art? Then if we look at Pierre Gauvreau, he was much more calculated in his art. There is often a vague sense of space in his paintings, though we're still have an ambiguous shape and an uneasy sense of relationships with each other. I'd like you to think about color. What is going on in terms of color in his paintings? Do you think he uses color intuitively, choosing colors almost at random? Finally, there's Marcel Barbeau, another of Les Automatistes, who in the 1950s exploited pattern, naming the paintings after the Natashquan River that flows from the Quebec-Labrador border and drains into the Gulf of St. Lawrence is an interesting thing to do. It's a painting only very vaguely of something, but rather it is about the pattern and the repetition of information, elements, and color. These are some of the things that we'll need to talk about in class, and we're going to explore them in much greater depth. See you then.